Welcome to the People Strategy Forum podcast. Today we're going to be diving deep into the art of salary negotiation with John Gates. So John is a best-selling author of the book Act Your Wage. So he is a former head of recruiting at some of the world's top companies out there, and now he's a leader of Salary Coach, which is a coaching platform, and then also recruiting transformations. And so he's working on both sides of the equation, which we're going to dive in here in the discussion today. So John brings a wealth of knowledge and to this crucial topic, and especially at this time where people are looking for work, and it's a difficult market out there. So in John's book, Act Your Wage, he has guided countless professionals to negotiate their wage in a substantial way, sometimes in over $20,000 in compensation or more. And so depending on your level, that can be extremely meaningful. For those higher levels, it can be, I think that John was mentioning earlier in the show, about 10 to 20%. So substantial increase in new salaries coming in. So John is not just an author, but he's a beacon for those that are looking to understand the nuances of negotiation and within the corporate landscape and working with recruiters. And so today he's going to shed light on why salary discussions remain taboo, and what we can do to change that and empower individuals to assert more of their negotiation powers at the onset. So let's prepare to transform your approach on salary negotiations with the topic Act Your Wage with the expertise of John Gates. Welcome, John.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Well, first, John, as we kind of start out these discussions, I love to dive into a little bit of your history and your passion for helping individuals negotiate their wage. And then also let's jump on the other side of the table too, as a reformer of recruiting teams. So let's start with just a little bit of your background.
Sure. A bit of my backstory. Hopefully it won't be too long of a story because I've been recruiting now for over 30 years. But I got started in the temporary service agency world, and they hired me because I looked good in a suit, I could speak Spanish, and I had a degree. And that was my start in recruiting. I think most recruiters fall into the world of recruiting instead of seeking it as a career, and that's what happened to me. But in the first 5 years of my career, since I worked for those agencies, it was starvation wages, man. I was making $16,000 a year.
Wow.
Working at that level. And finally, I got a chance to be a corporate technical recruiter for one of my clients. So that was a company in suburban Portland, Oregon. And I started working there. And finally, I started having more money than month. That was really great. And I was enjoying it so much. But 3 years into that journey, the marketing department made a big mistake. They brought a whole generation of products in that were a mismatch for the market. And the company that I'd been recruiting for decided it was time to get smaller by a significant margin. And this is something that recruiters face all the time, career recruiters. You're responsible for making a company bigger and to feed that growth curve. And as soon as a company decides that it's time to get smaller, recruiters and those in learning and development and other sort of not keep the lights on functions are easy targets for reduction. So throughout my career, I've been laid off 4 different times because of these reasons. And that's what happened when I was working there at Tektronix in Portland, Oregon. I got the layoff notice, and I just bought my first house 6 months earlier. And I was terrified, Sam.
Yeah.
I was, when you get laid off, you might get a severance plan. This particular one was very skinny because I'd only been there for 3 years. And I had 2 infant sons, one toddler and one newborn. And I was terrified. I didn't know what was going to happen. The economy was starting to get a little sluggish. And so I started going out to the market. And I ended up getting a chance to interview at Capital One in Richmond, Virginia, which is about as far away from Oregon as you can get. So I took the interview. Before that, though, I was getting all these screening calls from people just like me. They would call me and they would say, "So, John, what's the pay requirement here? How much do we need to pay you to get you to move to Louisiana or to Chicago or some other place like that?" And I was shocked because I had been asking those questions for years. Now I was getting those questions and I was completely unprepared to answer them. I could ask them, but I couldn't answer them. And I kept painting myself into a corner because I wanted to interview. I kept lowballing myself and I was desperate. So I know what it feels like to be in that place when you're in between and you're scared. Our tendency is to lowball ourselves. And so one of the things I do as a pay negotiation coach is I help people to navigate that minefield so they can avoid that mistake. But I interviewed with Capital One, and Capital One has the most difficult selection process I have ever seen. I learned a lot working there, but that's kind of a spoiler. I got picked, I got selected. So there you have to pass 23 different behavioral competencies in interviews. And if you fail even one of those, you don't get an offer. There were 3 different assessments that I had to take, written tests. And if you fail the cut score on any one of those, you're not getting an offer. And then I had to do a business case interview, which is a whiteboard exercise, math calculations, recommending a business decision. And if you fail that, you're not getting an offer. So after all that, a whole day of on-site grilling, I'm in the interview room and I'm wiping the sweat and blood off of myself. And in comes the recruiter that I've been working with. His name was Chip. So Chip comes in and he sits down and he sits across from me and he says, "John, I'm just going to level with you here. I've interviewed over 20 people for this job, and you and one other person are the only ones who've passed the process," and he just withdrew. "So what's it going to take to get you to say yes? Because I really want to close this out. Tell the manager that you're on board. You're moving from Oregon to Virginia. What's it going to take?" And for the first time in my life, like, I felt this sense of leverage that I'd never experienced before as a candidate. And I was very unprepared to handle that as well. I just told him, "Well, I need more salary. How about this? I want a different incentive plan. Can we upgrade that? Can I get a better relocation plan because I just bought a house and I'm worried about selling it? Well, how about a signing bonus?" And you know what? I got all of the above.
Yeah.
And I spent the next 3.5 years working at Capital One, wondering how much I left on the table because they said yes so fast. So it kind of ate at me. And so I started tracking this, and I'd just been laid off too. And I was keen to not get laid off again. I wanted to justify my value. So I started tracking how much my candidates were leaving on the table. So I would get an offer approved that, say, you can offer up to 135,000 on this. You've got a $10,000 signing bonus if you need it. And if I closed that at, say, 128, and I could go as high as 135, I just saved 7,000 in salary. And if I didn't need the signing bonus, I saved 10,000 in signing bonus. So I actually set a goal as a recruiter to cover my annual salary every month with salary negotiation savings. So I kind of became the internal expert on pay negotiation because that reputation started to filter around in the company, and I started training recruiters. And over the course of my career, I have trained hundreds of recruiters on how to negotiate pay with candidates on behalf of companies. And as I became the head of recruiting for big functions, I would set those goals after training to cover the entire recruiting department budget and the annual budget in pay negotiation savings, so that we could say we're not just a cost center, we're creating some financial value here because of our expertise. It was also a good way to argue that recruiters should be negotiating pay, not hiring managers. And I think that's something that I always try to bring, is subject matter expertise to the recruiting team. So eventually I went on to learn all the all the process rigor that I learned at Capital One was the foundation of my recruiting process redesign work. So every time I went from company to company to be the new recruiting leader was always to fix a broken function. I was the mechanic. I was the guy that was going to come in and make things faster, make things cheaper, make things better, improve the candidate experience, improve the internal hiring manager experience. There were always problems and they needed a fixer, and I was that person. So I developed a reputation in the industry for being someone who could reverse engineer all the problems and chart the path forward. And in 2016, I started recruiting transformations to do this for companies because by then I'd been laid off 4 times. I was getting kind of tired of that.
Yeah.
I wanted, I wanted to do all of this process fixing without the concerns about being laid off and things like that, because that was my favorite part of being a recruiting leader. So now I provide interim recruiting leadership. I'll recruit the next person who's coming in. I fix the recruiting problems that are persistent. But a couple of years ago, I thought maybe since I've been helping people informally with their pay negotiation for a number of years, I wonder if I could help people that I had never met. I'd always help the inner circle. And I think as HR people, we do that. Our friends or our family, our closest people, they're in a job hunt and we help them with their resume or we help them get through. Well, I'd been doing that for years on pay negotiation, and I started to notice I was helping people to get a lot of extra money
Hmm.
safely without putting that offer at risk. So a few years ago, maybe 3 years now, I ran a pilot on LinkedIn. I reached out to salaried people who were in a job hunt, people that I didn't know, and I said, how about this? I want to help you for free. Let's see if we can work together to improve your pay package. And wow, in every single case, I was getting people more money, teaching them how to avoid the big risk points in pay negotiation. And then I thought, well, maybe I have a business here.
Yeah.
That's when I launched Salary Coach, and been doing that ever since as kind of a side gig. But now it's growing to the point where it might even become the primary thing. Um, there's a lot of demand and also a lot of really bad advice that's out there in the world on this front. And I'm very sensitive to the emotional needs of people that are in between. Most people are afraid, and that's why they end up leaving money on the table. So when they're armed with knowledge and how to do that, some of that fear just dissolves. And then it becomes fairly easy. And these are skills anyone can learn. And it serves you throughout your career every time you change jobs.
So we do have a question on that online. So what is the most common problems or challenges that you see in recruiting, and how do you address that?
There are several. I think time to fill is probably the most common problem where a chief HR officer is under fire in those executive meetings because it's just taking too long to fill positions. When a company's growing and they're trying to take advantage of a window of growth opportunity, um, let's say, hey, if we could only grow our sales function or our engineering function fast enough, we could take advantage of these market situation or the conditions that we're in. The longer it takes to staff a function that needs to grow into an opportunity like that, the more costly it is. So all these profit centers of the business are really leaning on the chief HR officer to fix this problem. But a lot of recruiting teams, they don't know how to fix the problem. They're too close to the problem. So I think that's the number one most common issue. Another one is sometimes the recruiting team has lost the trust of their customers in some way, shape, or form. They are not just going too slow. Maybe they're too expensive, or they've delivered pipelines of candidates that are way off target.
Hmm.
And so now the hiring manager thinks, well, I'm not sure this team is up to the task. So I'm going to go around them and contract with a third party search agency. And the costs are just beginning to explode because of that. And These teams are very rescuable. They're not lost causes. They just need to know how to do the job in a way that's going to reinforce and rebuild trust. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, thanks, John. So you were talking a lot of the complexities and challenges of recruiting teams, and my hat goes off to them because you're right. I mean, that's during the busy times, they're hiring, and bringing in important talent, critical talent to the organization, and as soon as the market turns, you're right. They're the first ones that go because okay, we're not hiring next year, or we're not hiring through the next 6 months. Then we don't need a recruiting team. and
Right.
and then those professionals are go out into the marketplace where the market has been the driest for years. And so it's
Yeah, we've seen a wave of recruiting talent come into the job search world. Some of
yeah,
my clients actually are recruiters that are used to negotiating on the other side, but they don't know how to do it as a candidate.
yeah, and I think that brings a really good humanistic tone to the equation, right? Because now
Mhm.
they're knowing what it's like to be uh, on the other side of the table, and the pressure that they
Mhm.
face, and so forth.
Sure.
So in I guess in I guess kind of to turn the tables a bit on the past few years of what we've been seeing in the regulatory environments. I mean, there's been pay fairness regulation, and then also pay transparency laws across the United States where the pay range has been displayed. How do you see this type of communication impacting the market?
I think it's a good thing. I think candidates have been asking for this for a long, long time. They want to know approximately what the job is going to pay. But it is a two-edged sword. I think candidates would prefer to know precisely and exactly what the job is going to pay. Some of them think that salary transparency laws are the silver bullet that's going to solve all the angst around negotiating pay. But you're still looking at a range, and you still want to be able to move up in that range. Sometimes even companies, and typically, if the job can be posted at more than one level, usually the automation, the applicant tracking system, will only allow you to post the job at one level. And so you're going to post it probably at the lower of the two levels. So for candidates, it is possible that they could pay you more than what's being advertised. And because of that, I think sometimes recruiting teams suffer. A candidate will look at that range and they'll say, well, that's too low. I'm not going to apply. When in fact, they might even desire somebody who could come in at that higher level. Maybe instead of a director, they would like to have somebody who could operate as a senior director or something like that. So I think that it scratches an itch for candidates. Um, it does cause problems for companies that have inequitable or very secretive pay structures. So, Sam, you are a comp professional. You've probably seen this in your lifetime. Companies, especially smaller companies, they have a separate deal with every person that they've hired. They have two people that are at the same level in the organization with vastly different pay packages.
Hmm.
Now, when they're compelled to post ranges, in the past it's been very political, very secretive. This makes companies very, very nervous that now the person they've been underpaying for years is going to realize that they're gonna have to straighten their situation out some. So it's kind of a big topic, and there's
Yeah.
a lot of things we could comment on here.
Right. One of the things that we've heard a lot of clients struggle with is when they're posting the full range, it attracts the candidate to really hire at the top of that range.
Right. That is an unintended consequence. I think
Yeah.
if the range is 150 to 220, they're always going to say, I want 220, or very frequently or commonly going to say that.
Mhm.
It does help you to land in the range somewhere when you're applying, which helps with the screening process. So, yep, that's an issue. And for this reason, like some companies, depending on the law of the state, every state law is different in this respect. But some companies, if they can still comply, are posting the minimum to the midpoint.
Mhm.
Some companies are posting ranges that are inclusive of the target incentives. In some cases, it's salary only. And these are things that the candidate doesn't know unless the company spells it out specifically in their range.
Mhm. And then we can have a whole separate conversation on the recruiting side of the business. And perhaps, John, this will be a great opportunity to have you back. But back on the heart of the salary negotiation piece.
Hmm.
So, what is the best way for your clients when you're coaching them on taking or having that interview? How does that journey look like?
Are you talking about the interview process itself?
Yes,
Yeah.
and how they should kind of influence that interview process.
Okay. Very good question. I think the number one outcome that everybody's looking for is they want to get selected.
Mhm.
That's the goal of the interview process. You want to be the one that the hiring manager says, this is the person that I want. And as the recruiting leader, I've sat in on those debrief sessions where you pull the whole interview team together after you've interviewed three or four people and you ask the question, how do you rate this person versus this person versus this person? And you're trying to drive to a decision. So I've kind of had the inside track on those discussions for years and years and years. And one of the things that I've discovered that's useful for candidates to know is that hiring is often emotional. It's not as logical as people think. Some people think, well, you've got all these qualifications. I'm going to hire the most qualified person. Um, yes, maybe. In a hiring manager's mind, they're imagining that they have certain problems that they want this person to solve, certain high risk or high impact things that they want them to effectively accomplish. The hiring manager has their own goals for the performance of the department. Their bonus might depend upon certain things that this person's going to do, and so deep inside somewhere, they're wondering, well, am I going to hire a person who's going to help me to get my bonus? Or am I going to hire a person who's going to reduce my bonus? So if you put yourself in the hiring manager's shoes and mentality, interviewing becomes slightly different. It goes beyond, all right, they're asking me a bunch of questions and I'm going to answer them as best I can. The best candidates, I think, are ones who identify what the hiring manager wants to accomplish or the things that they're most terrified of.
Mhm.
And if you can help them to avoid their biggest fears or attain their biggest ambitions, then you'll be the one that they emotionally want to hire, even if you're less qualified than somebody else. They want somebody who's going to come in and support their success. And so many candidates miss this opportunity to sell themselves in a different way beyond just like answering the interview questions and nailing the answers to those questions. Does that help you, Sam?
It does definitely, and so basically, it sounds like to really show highlight the value that you can bring and how you can do that as a trusted partner to the organization. Kind of, does that
Yeah,
sound right?
yeah. And I'll share a secret. This is kind of an insider secret, but to put some meat on the bone here, if you're a candidate or somebody you know who is a candidate can use this, try it and use it. The end of most interviews, you have a chance to ask a few questions, right? There's 5 minutes or something. What questions do you have for me? And a lot of people waste that time asking questions about the scope of the job or things like that, and sometimes even the benefits or what. Those are curiosity satisfiers, and if you're going to move forward, you'll have a chance to get your curiosity satisfied later.
Hmm.
Right now, you're trying to be selected, so use this time to pitch yourself, to sell yourself. So a good question to ask could be something like, if you hire the wrong person for this, what's the worst thing that could happen to you? And you could ask that of the hiring manager or anybody else that's interviewing you. If you're being interviewed by someone, they have personal stakes in this. You're hiring a peer, or you are interviewing with a customer. They all have the nightmare scenario in their mind. If we hire the wrong person, this is the bad thing that could happen to me. So once you know what that bad thing is, you can say something like, well, if you hire me instead of someone else, you're not going to have to worry about that because, and now you bring in the example. You bring in, you're not going to have to worry about that because I have delivered similar projects on time and under budget. That's if the worst case scenario is we missed the go live on this project. And then you can say, now let me tell you how I've done that. So what you're doing is you're reassuring this interviewer that their worst case scenario is not going to happen if they hire you instead of somebody else. Most of your competition is not going to do this. So that's how you can work toward that emotional attachment that you're looking for as a candidate.
So,
John, once a
Yes, Howard.
candidate is they know they're going to get an offer. Most people are uncomfortable talking about compensation and salary and their needs. How do you prepare the folks that you work with in terms of getting them ready to have those conversations?
Very good question, Howard. So what I do in my coaching practice, if I have a coaching client that wants that level of coaching, is I invite them and suggest strongly that we should talk at every major step of the process. So, especially when you get an offer. So, I advise them if they get an offer, first of all, don't accept it right away. I'll give them an actual script. When you get an offer, this is what you say to buy yourself a couple of days. Now, the reason I do that, first of all, is I want them to call me right away so that we can work together to strategize how we're going to approach this offer, discover if we have their best and final offer or if there are some things that can be adjusted or improved. In order to do that, you have to ask the right questions at the right time and in the right way. So I coach them through all that. But just to make this point real for people, the most leverage and power as a candidate that you ever have in this whole process is the time between when you get an offer and when you say yes.
Mhm.
Now, when I was recruiting, 80+% of the candidates I was pitching offers to would accept immediately. So, my strong advice is even if you love that offer, and you're so ready to put this uncertainty of the job search to bed. You just don't want any chance that you're going to risk this. You like it enough to say yes. That's a giant red flag that you're about ready to leave a lot of money on the table.
hmm.
A lot. One of my clients came to me with that exact thing. He was a chief operating officer. He came to me and he said, John, I just got an offer. I think it's good enough. And I said, hold up. um, let's talk this through. And we ended up working him through that process. This is a COO for a multi-billion-dollar company. By the time we were done modifying that offer and negotiating with the CEO, his offer improved by over $600,000.
Wow.
That is an eye-popping thing. He almost left two Ferraris on the table because he was just so ready to be done with the uncertainty.
Right.
So be very, very careful and keep in mind the companies that offer you a job, you've been selected, what they want more than anything is for you to say yes.
hmm.
And when you are negotiating pay, think of it this way, and negotiating anything for that matter. When someone wants something, usually you can ask for something in return,
Mm-hmm.
as long as it's reasonable and as long as it's win-win. And so, how do we keep that risk low? Like, that's the main thing that people are worried about. This is why people don't negotiate. They're terrified
Right.
somebody's going to pull that offer away, especially in a
Mhm.
soft market like this, but you can still get everything you want, even in a soft market, if you do it right. So the key here is keeping the risk very, very low. And that's why I built the salary coach method, by the way, is to keep the risk low at every step. Um, this helps people to do it. So does that help you, Howard?
Yes, yes.
Good.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, though, in terms of I think most people are afraid that if I ask for something, they're going to rescind the offer, and But I think people lose sight that the company has invested a lot of time,
Mm.
effort in selecting the candidate. They don't want to start over.
Oh, you're so right, Howard. So there are usually two things that can go on. One is that they have a silver medalist in the wings,
Hmm.
and the other is that they don't. And most of the time they don't. Um, so it's kind of a rare situation. I'd say maybe 20 or 30% of the time in my recruiting career do we have a really strong silver medalist that they would be just as happy with.
Hmm.
Most of the time there are bigger problems with the silver medalist, and now they have a hard decision to make. Do we go back and keep looking, or do we take a bigger risk? Hiring people is always a risk. If you hire the wrong person, it's just the biggest disaster ever for a hiring manager. It hurts their reputation, it hurts their team morale, it's everything. So people are cautious.
Right.
If you've been selected, it means you've gotten rid of the fears. So you are right. They don't want to go back. And if time to fill is 60 or 90 days, guess what? They go back to the beginning. They're going
Mhm.
to have to wait another 60 or 90 days. Meanwhile, the people on the team are frustrated that they have to do two jobs.
Right.
Right.
This is a nightmare scenario. So you have a lot of leverage during this time. Don't overplay your hand, but and also another bit of free advice: don't be somebody that you're not. Don't change your personality. Howard, something that most people might be wondering right now is how often does it actually happen when an offer gets rescinded
Right.
because of the negotiation process? It's pretty rare, I think, in my
Hmm.
experience. It doesn't happen very often. It's something people are terrified of, but it's like playing Russian roulette with a revolver that holds 100 rounds, and there's only one bullet in there somewhere.
Right.
And the only way that trigger is even going to be pulled is if usually if your personality changes. That's so people often think they have to be really aggressive to
Mm.
negotiate their pay, for example. That is not true. You really should be nice in this process. And but that's when my phone rings as a recruiting leader. Hiring manager says, "I really liked Howard. He was the best person we've interviewed so far. But now that we're negotiating, there's something very different about Howard. And now I'm worried that the Howard that we interviewed is not
Mm.
the Howard we're going to get."
Hmm.
Good point.
And that's the one, that's the thing that tends to um, poison the well. The hiring manager now starts to think about, am I hiring the wrong person? That's what gets the offer rescinded more than anything else. It's not as much about the numbers if you're handling it right.
Great.
Well, what do you think there, Sumit? I know that you've been itching to share your thoughts on this.
Say that again. I missed that question.
Oh, I was just bringing in Sumit.
Oh, submit. Yes.
Yeah, so I had a question. So in my part of the world, in fact, this also probably relates to the LinkedIn question that we see on the screen. Um, my part of the world, the salary negotiation process usually begins early, and there's a lot more opacity. So there's no legal mandate to um, put out the salary range for a position. So you can just say we pay competitive salaries or we pay industry leading
Hmm.
salaries when the salary is nowhere close to industry leading.
Yeah.
And it's also accepted practice for a recruiter to call you and to insist on knowing what's your current salary.
Mhm.
And usually they base your future salary as a percentage increase on that. And so until you've actually gone through and made it to the final round, you don't really know what is the number that's on offer. And if you insist too strongly, they would just drop you as a candidate very often, and even larger companies. So what would your advice be on how to um, not get kicked out of the race? So, I mean, the silver medalist would be a bit of a faraway scenario where you're not even being allowed to participate in the race at times.
Sumit, what you just suggested is a common problem in all markets. There is almost always some sort of upfront screening process to decide. And here's what here's what the well, before I get into the answer, can you tell me what geography you're in? That might be helpful to me.
I'm based in India.
In India. Okay, so most of my experiences in the U.S. and in Europe, which are also different markets, but what you just described is a very common thing. And if you're in a market where there's a ton of competition, it's a lot easier to remove somebody from consideration early in that screening process. If you got 100 really qualified people, you can be insanely picky and you have to be very, very careful. But there are a couple of techniques that I suggest. Um, when your phone rings and somebody says, "What's your pay requirement?" that recruiter wants to know, "Can I get you?" And this is true everywhere. Um, a recruiter who's screening on the front end will not be a recruiter very long if they're tying up the hiring manager and the hiring team's time with somebody that they can't close in the end. So they do have a range that they're thinking about because all people aren't the same unless you're talking about completely commodity skills. You have a help desk analyst and it pays $37.16 an hour, and it's not going to be anything different from that. Most salary positions have a range that they would consider depending on the experience and talents and value of the person. So the trick is you want to land inside that range somewhere. You want to be answering that question, can I get you, with a yes. The easiest, lowest risk thing for recruiters to do, and this is what I train recruiters to do, by the way, is to get a number early in that stage because you have a range. You want to know if the number fits in the range because that's an easy, you're in the box or you're not in the box. You say yes or a no. And if that answer is a yes, now you go on to look at their qualifications. Are they qualified? Are they interested? So this early screening process, Sumit, I call a QIA, which is qualified, interested, and affordable. And if you're not all three of those, you should not be moving forward in the process.
Yeah.
So how do you avoid lowballing yourself at this stage? So what I advise my clients to do, and in the salary coach method all throughout, this is a staple. And that is to answer that question, what's your salary requirement at this stage, with a range of your own. Don't give a number. And you can say, well, I appreciate the question. I want to be transparent about that. And because at the end, we all want this to work. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you that I'm in an active job search. I'm talking to other companies, and the range that I'm discussing with them is between A and B. Now, if they like your qualifications and they like your level of interest, and your range overlaps their range in some way, usually you can satisfy that affordability question and move forward. But you're doing a couple things for yourself here at this step. You're not bringing in, I've done my research and this is what my research says, because that's really easy to argue with. Instead, you're saying, I'm talking to other companies and this is the range that I'm discussing with them. Now they know if they want to get you, they're competing with somebody else. That improves your value. If there are multiple companies coming at you and they all are interested, that communicates to the person on the other end of the phone that you're going to be gone soon, that you're a hot commodity, that there's something about you that other people like. In the world of psychology, we call that social proof.
Mhm.
Or there's another thing I refer to in my book. I call it mimetic desire. So the example I use in my book is a room filled with toys. You've got a giant room filled with toys. There's 100 toys in this room, and you have two, two toddlers, two 2-year-olds in a room full of toys. Toddler A picks up one of the toys, and which toy does toddler B want? Always, 100% of the time. It's the toy that toddler A just picked up.
Right.
This is human nature across the world. It's sorcery that candidates can use to help them become more valuable in the eyes of people, to create a sense of competition, to have competition that helps you at every step of the process. So, is this going to work every time, Submit? Probably not. But when it does work, it's going to work most of the time. When you get into the interview now, you've created a range. You haven't painted yourself into a corner. Now you use the interview to improve your value and move up in your own range. You're creating that sense of competition all the way along and the idea here is you want the best initial offer that you can get. And it's a common mistake to think that negotiating begins when you have an offer. I think negotiation is a process that starts in the application, even when they ask you how much. And Submit, you can sometimes, most, if not most of the time, you can find out what the range is, even if it hasn't been published. This is how you might do that. When they ask you what your pay requirement is, you can say, that's great. I'm willing to answer that and be very transparent. Let's work together on this. But first, can you tell me what your budget is for the position? And then you have to be very quiet for about 8 seconds. And if you look at your watch and you figure out what does 8 seconds feel like of silence, it starts to get really painful. People will tend to fill that silence with their own voice. And when I'm training people to interview, hiring managers and hiring teams to interview candidates, this is a primary thing that I try to teach people. Ask a hard interview question and then be quiet. It communicates that you are expecting an answer here. Now,
Mhm.
they could say, no, I'm not going to answer that question. But most of the time they will. And if they say, no, I'm not going to answer that question, or it's a very broad range, it could be almost anything, then you just answer with your own range. And your own range can be very wide as well. But most of the time, they're going to give you their range. And if they do, then your range should overlap theirs. And also, a little tip here, make the top end of your range above the top end of theirs. Because very often, as we mentioned earlier, there's another grade above that they might be able to offer the ideal candidate. And recruiters like me, we want to set a candidate's expectations as low as possible because when it comes time to offer the job to someone, we want them to say yes. And we don't want to offer something that's less than what we've talked about. We would prefer to offer something that's a little more. So an illustration here is if you say your salary requirement is $92,000 a year, and we agree to move forward on that, and the offer comes in at 88, you're going to be disappointed and you might say no.
Mhm.
But if the recruiter pushed your expectations down to 85 and you agree to interview anyway, and now the offer comes in at 88, you feel a different kind of way. And your chances of closing that candidate as a recruiter improve This is why recruiters often will shove that expectation down. They try to make you feel like the actual hiring number or range is going to be lower than it is. They'll never tell you that there's a grade above, or that you, if the top of the range is 220, they will not want to tell you that this could pay 240.
Right. So, John, I mean, I know that we've gone over a lot of pieces here, and we're coming to the end of our time today. So much to talk about on this topic that we could explore. So it's, and perhaps, I mean, we should definitely have you again on many fronts to talk about the salary negotiation in general, and then also looking on the recruiter side and how to optimize the recruiting process. I think that'd be
Would
great.
love to do that with you, Sam, anytime. This has been
Yes.
a joy.
Perfect. So, would John, I mean, tell us what are the for or people that are listening out there that are interested in knowing? I mean, maybe they're in a job search, maybe they're thinking about negotiating their salary, maybe they have a few offers on the table. What are the things that we want them to walk away from this conversation? What are the top things they should be thinking about?
Yeah, okay. I think the number one mistake that people make is taking the offer immediately. So don't do that to yourself. And if you get an offer, you're welcome to reach out to me, and I'll help you to optimize that. But the other big takeaway is to think that or to know that the negotiation process is a process that starts early. So I can help people to make a lot more money if they engage with me sooner rather than at the offer stage. There's several ways you can learn this stuff. You can reach out to me personally, and I'll help you. You can pick up a copy of my book, which is right here, and it's on Amazon. It's a great resource and goes through what to say and how to say it at all the steps. It just doesn't have me coaching you. And the third option is the Salary Coach Academy, which is a series of bite sized video lessons on how to talk about pay at every single step of the process. Academy members can upgrade to time with me if they want. So if there's anybody that would be interested in that, reach out to me and I can give you a 60% off coupon. Especially during this holiday season, I want to make that much more affordable for everyone. So let me know if you're interested in that, and I can guide you down the path there.
Such a great offer there, John. But before we conclude our call today, we do have one more question that came in. I was wondering if you have time to address. Now, obviously, there's different regulations around the world as far as communicating pay or asking about past pay, and also age and gender and so forth and different things. So, could you help us answer this question? How do you address concerns about your age and its potential impact on your salary negotiation, especially when employers may have concerns about your long-term commitment to the organization?
Yes, I'm glad you raised this topic. In fact, we could talk for an hour on this. So I will just get to it quickly. In the Salary Coach Academy, in fact, I have a whole video on how to address this. But for now, I'll just talk about it briefly. It's important when you are interviewing. Like you can hide your age or disguise your age on your resume and your CV fairly easily, but you can't hide it when you're on camera or interviewing in person. You have to go into that. If you are an aging professional north of 50 years old, you have to understand that people have a bias. This is a tape that is playing in their head. As soon as they see those gray hairs, this is what they're actually going to think. All right. Now, don't be offended by this, but this is what people think. They think you're going to retire soon. They think maybe you haven't learned anything new in the last 10 years. They think you're not going to be adaptable or change easily, that you're going to be stubborn and stuck in your ways, that you might be, all of these things. So even technology, maybe you don't know any new technology. You're not current on your technology. So if that's what the interviewer is thinking, you cannot confirm that bias during the interview. So if you show up and your energy level is low, and they think, well, of course, he's old. His energy level is going to be low. That just confirms all these other biases in their mind. So you have to show up with high energy level. You have to show up with current technology or examples of current technology, that you are on the cutting edge, that you are adaptable. So when the interview questions start to come, you need to work some of this stuff into your answer. So you're defying the stereotype. You're defying the bias. And so what they once thought before you opened your mouth, they realize that that's not true, that you're going to hit the ground running, that you know the latest and greatest. And if you can do all that, now all of your experience becomes valuable instead of all these points of risk. This person's going to be too stubborn to adjust, or they're going to be expensive but not bringing the value. So I hope that at least sets the table on this issue. We can't solve the issue of ageism I think with regulation. It's going to be very difficult. This bias is insidious, and it lives everywhere. So it's going to be up to candidates to prepare themselves to defy the bias. Do not show up to an interview with a flip phone that's 18 years old.
Yeah.
Do not give examples that are from 18 years ago.
Right. Definitely good advice there, John. Hey, so John, I just want to thank you once again. I mean, it's been a pleasure having you on the show today. I think we've learned a lot here, and I think our listeners have as well. Looking forward to our next discussion on the topic, because this has been rich and filled with a lot of additional questions I would love to ask, and we just don't have enough time for today. But
thank you, Sam. I'd be happy to come back if there's interest in that. All
right, great. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today, and we'll see you next week on the People Strategy Forum.
All right, Howard, Sumit, nice to meet you.
Take care.